Hello, Barnet.
Hello, Lilou. Bonjour.
Bonjour. It's great to connect. Thank you
So
for accepting this interview.
it's such a pleasure. It's so nice, especially since I don't have to leave my house.
How perfect. So you're an award-winning Hollywood producer and director, and you worked on some famous scripts, including The Celestine Prophecy with James Redfield,
Yep.
and many other ones. I'm really interested to know a bit more about your story and your background, and how this is related to your spiritual path.
That's a great question, and it's great because I've been giving it a lot of thought recently. So I happen to have an answer because I've just been thinking about it. Uh,
Yes.
I grew up in a very small village in northern Quebec, a village of 3,000 people, and I thought that if I was a very good boy and I did everything that I was told, that I would, and I followed instructions, and I did well in school, and I was always honest, and I would be successful in life. And this is what we're all taught. And when I was 12 years old, one day I was alone in the house, and I was going through my parents' drawers, and I found a paper that said I was adopted. And I was shocked. I was shocked that I never knew this. So, I see my daughter's calling on the Skype line, so let me
That makes it real.
yeah, real time. She's in Mexico. I'll talk about that later. But I found this, and I was so shocked that there was this big secret, and this was my first experience of the power of a secret, the power of a story that is kept as a secret. And I didn't understand. It had a tremendous impact on me because I didn't understand how terrible that must be. What terrible thing that must be if it was kept a secret from me. So years later, many years later, was the summer of love. And there was lots of free love and lots of substance abuse. And I wasn't getting any free love. And so I did experiment with the substance abuse. And what happened in that experience was that it opened up my unconscious and my subconscious in ways that I was unprepared for. I'm going to
Yeah.
my daughter off
Your
again.
daughter keeps on calling you.
I was very unprepared for this, and what came up was all of the thoughts and all of the feelings and all of the unacknowledged opinions that I held about myself, judgments and disappointments and feelings of being bad and shame, and all of this erupted in me like a BP well in the Gulf. It just poured out. And that was my experience of the second kind of stories, the second kind of secrets. And those are the ones that we keep from ourselves. And I didn't realize it then, but when I look back now, I see that those two events were like the headwaters of what has become my life's work, which is to discover our stories, mostly the stories that are around the secrets that we keep from others and that most important that we keep from ourselves. When we can shine the light on these things, we become free to release them. And then we have the power to let go of all of the kinds of stories that have played out of our lives through those secrets and to choose new ones. So I didn't understand it then, but those were the road to an exploration of consciousness for me. And to a lesser extent, they began to formulate my fascination with storytelling, which is expressed in my work as a storyteller. But again, to put things into perspective, that is a lot of fun, but the big game for me in life is to explore my stories as somebody that is on a conscious path.
So which are the stories that most profoundly touch you, to storytelling?
Well, I've learned that there are three kinds of stories. And the first story, this is the story of what happened to me. What happened to me? I was hurt, I was shamed, I was abused, I was abandoned, I was beaten, I was disapproved of, I was left out. All of the stories of this is what happened to me. The second kind of story is the story of how I overcame what happened to me. I persevered, I committed myself, I worked on myself, I learned to love myself, I got the job, I got the health, I lost the weight, I made the money, I got the promotion, and I found the love and I've triumphed. This is the second kind of story. And these stories are beautiful. The third kind of story, and that's the story that is my life's passion now. What happens when we have worked through the little story, worked through the triumph story? Next comes a story of where do I now begin to give to the world in order to discover the story of my real connection with myself and with other people, and my real position of making a difference. What is my life really about? What is the meaning and purpose, and how do I give my gifts to the world? This is the third kind of story, and to me it's the most powerful story. And this is the story that we are all here incarnated into the world to discover and then to live into. When we begin to live into that third kind of story, we're no longer following in the footsteps of teachers, parents, authority figures, outside world, gurus. Now we are making our own maps, and it's coming from inside, from the heart. It's coming from the divine, and it's working through us. We become the vehicles in some kind of ecstatic dance of personal discovery and service. That's the kind of story that draws me in my work, and it is the story of my life at this point. And I'm in a process of discovering it. I'm opening my eyes day by day, and I'm finding new pieces. I can't hear you. What happened?
I know that you also do some coaching, but you primarily produce, don't you, movies and series?
I produce movies. I produce a little bit of television if I find the right story. I do some workshop leading and some teaching, and I co-host a radio program called Cutting Edge Consciousness with our mutual friend Freeman.
Yeah.
And this is on in Southern California on KKZZ AM radio, and it's also on podcast. And we interview every week thought leaders in the areas of science and spirituality and consciousness and entrepreneurs. And it's a very, very engaging conversation back and forth.
So what kind of stories, I'm trying to find out what kind of stories that we know of or that we can watch that you have produced that really tells those kind of stories that have opened up your own journey and you believe other people's spiritual journey.
My favorite story, my favorite film that I've been involved with, it's called Homeless to Harvard.
Okay.
And it is the true story of a wonderful, wonderful woman named Liz Murray, very inspiring, who as a young girl had parents who were addicts, and they both passed away very early as a result of this. And she discovered while living on the streets that self-pity was a dead end, and she determined that she was not going to end up in the same place as her parents. And she got herself through high school in 2 years instead of 4, taking a huge, huge classical course load, everything, while living on the F train, going up and down Manhattan in the subways. And she succeeded in graduating in 2 years and earning a scholarship to Harvard, and went through Harvard. She inspired this wonderful movie that we made, and she is now an amazing, amazing woman out in the world, inspiring people and uplifting them by example. Not so much about the telling, but by living in an attitude of possibility and in an attitude of with absolutely free of self-pity or any sense of victim or that the false notion that the world happens to us. She understood very young a great, great spiritual truth that I live my life by and I'm growing into day by day, which is that we are the authors of our reality 100%, and things do not happen to us. And what goes on in the world that we find difficult or unpleasant is a mirror of aspects of the self that require healing and love and acceptance and understanding and releasing and forgiving. She understood that very, very young, and so she has been, from a very, very early age, a magician and an inspiration.
Mm. Do you believe you're a magician too?
Yes, I do.
What is for you a magician of life?
A magician is someone, first of all, just to put it in perspective, to a culture that has no exposure to ideas or to innovation or even to invention, to a culture that 20 years ago would look at the internet, they would think this is magic. So anything beyond our ability to perceive and conceive appears magical. If we looked at a flat piece of water, a piece of paper, or at the surface of water, and we saw a pin of just a dot, you would not know that in 3 dimensions that dot, if it was pushed forward, would emerge and be a globe. It could be a tennis ball. It could be a giant. It could be a ball the size of the earth. In 2 dimensions, it's just a dot. So magic is a point of view. And I consider myself a magician because I am opening myself to working at dimensions of power that have to do with becoming more and more conscious with what was heretofore below that waterline, what looked like a dot. Underneath it are thoughts, feelings, choices, decisions, attitudes, beliefs, and those tools out of which we become lucid dreamers are powered up and fired with expectation and imagination and desire. And when one begins to become very conscious of all of those tools that are always working, but are often working on autopilot, almost the way our computers work, where we can sometimes find that our computers slow down and we realize, we have all sorts of open programs on our desktop that we didn't even know were there. Well, similarly, we may have all kinds of open programs that are programming for one intention or one expectation or another that is not necessarily in alignment with what we say we're asking for. But at the level of our programming, it's what we want. So until we can go below that waterline and become aware of what it is that is operating underneath there, and look at it and own it and recognize it and forgive it and release it and then change it, then when we do that, our lives change. We change our stories. Our lives automatically change. And to many, that looks like pure illogical magic. And to me, it is illogical. It is beyond logic and reason without losing sight of logic and reason. There's a very delicate balance. And these are the qualities, I believe, of this kind of what will be on the other side of this evolutionary process. I don't know what it is, but it is certainly intuitive. It is certainly beyond logic and reason, which is a very prescribed box. There is more to us as consciousness than what is inside that little box of logic and reason. So that is why I consider myself a magician, because this stuff truly is magical.
What are some of the practices that you do on a daily basis, possibly to awaken this magic or to be in this flow, to be connected?
This interview is a good example. I respond to the world and in a way that allows me to remind myself time and time again that I am not separate from nature, that nature is not trying to figure everything out. Nature is not trying to get stuff to happen and figure things out. Nature flows and is supported by all of the rest of nature and is supported by all that is. It has a rhythm to it, and it allows me to drop out of the part of me, the mental part of me that has strategies and has focus and is going to power through. And this is the kind of attitude that has worked very, very well. It's gotten the world to where it is now, certainly the Western world. But it is not working as effectively anymore as it used to. We're going to require new skills and new talents and new insights and a more expanded consciousness set. We're going to have to pull other tools out of our toolkit, and those involve intuition and the humility to receive guidance and wisdom from others, and a new sense of cooperation, a new way of relating to the world, where we understand that there is no inside and outside, that it's all one thing, and that what goes on in the world for each of us is a mirror of what is going on within. So I make a practice of more and more of relating to the day and to the people and to the events that I experience from this perspective. And it's been a very long time since I regarded the world as something that happens to me.
Mm-hmm. What do you, I think my image is frozen. I don't know if you can see this, but anyway.
I do see it frozen, but
you can hear, so what do you think, for example, the men are embodying, or just men versus women, men are particularly maybe challenge and embodying some things that needs to, that as a man you need to break through, in this society? I mean, is there some common challenges? What are some of your challenges as a man that you had to overcome to live this evolution and be a magician in your life?
There's two parts to that. I'm glad you asked that. There's two pieces. The first part, whoops, I lost you. Are you there?
yeah, I'm just resetting it.
Okay. The first part is the easier part. The first part has to do with the conditioning that we all, men and women, we all endure from being very small children up until the point where we open our eyes and realize that we have been conditioned and programmed with beliefs and with attitudes and with assumptions and with what's called the ways of the world. And that is essentially a hierarchical model, which goes something like the most powerful, those among us that are the most powerful, they are the ones that set the agenda, and everybody else falls into a hierarchy underneath. And the top of the power heap are men, because they're stronger, but this is systemic all the way through. So when we realize that this is a conditioning, then things begin to change. So that's the first piece. And as a man, I had to deal with the flip side of that. There were very, very many, many years when in my marriage, for instance, when my wife was much, much more successful than I was, and by grace of her, of the quality of our relationship and her belief in me, it was sometimes very difficult many, many years ago. We've been married for now 30 years, but 30 years ago, a woman who was making more money and the man that was tripling out, this was still a very kind of taboo and a very fraught area. And even then, for all of the work that I was doing on myself, even back then, it was a very, very sensitive and hot button. I felt less than and not good, and I had shame about it. And this is all a function of this kind of chauvinistic programming. Well, we all have that programming. Men have that programming. Women have that programming. So this leads me to the second part of your question. I don't believe I hear often in the circles that we move, in people that are involved in growth and in consciousness, there is often a discussion about men have an issue. To me, it isn't a gender problem. This has to do with a chauvinism that is an imbalance of masculine energy, not men energy. It's masculine energy and feminine energy. And that's systemic. It is equally imbalanced, whatever our genders are. Whether we are men or whether we are women, we have all been conditioned. Men have been conditioned to be victimizers. And women, this is not, it's oversimplification, but in the broadest terms, the men are the powerful ones, and they've been the victimizers. And the women have been cultured and conditioned to believe that they are the victims. But both of these things are the flip side of the same coin. The coin is called chauvinism, and we've all bought into it. And we have all alienated the essential feminine energy, which is an energy that is not linear. It's not logical. It doesn't live in a straight line. And as we move through these evolutionary times, through these times of shift, as it's been referred to by so many people, what the challenge is for our culture, that we're beginning to see the inflow, the acceptance of the feminine energy more so and more so. And as a result, the form that we have been accustomed to of linear progression is breaking down. So this is the feminine energy returning. The struggle around it is part of that legacy of this chauvinistic the energy, which has to do with wanting to control, wanting to resist, wanting to be in charge, wanting to dominate. And so we push back and we resist this evolutionary move towards holism, and we try and keep it in a straight line. It's like trying to put the whole of God, Goddess, all that is, into a string of pearls. One little pearl at a time on a string. And it just doesn't work like that. It's just, we are beginning to discover that the feminine energy is the container. It is the womb of all perception and conception and all creativity. And when that gigantic creative force is stuffed down and constricted into logic and linear thinking, we end up in a struggle. So it's not about men and it's not about women, although one of the expressions of how it's played out over the years has been a battle of the sexes. We are all equally dealing with finding that balance of the yin and the yang, and learning what that feminine energy really, really is, because we've shut it out. We've shut it out as a culture for so many years, for so many centuries.
That is so wonderfully put. I love it. I love, and I've expressed it in some videos recently, that I'm absolutely loved and moved by men that are expressing their sensitivity and are embodying feminine energy. And as you said, as a woman, we can have more masculine energy, go-getters, and there's a lot of women like that. So it's for all of us to embrace and open up to that feminine energy.
And find the balance.
And find the balance.
Because there is also a very long tradition of dominating masculine energy. Yeah. Well, that is not integrated masculine energy. The God energy is the energy that fills the space with creativity. It doesn't control the space, fills it with creativity. The goddess energy is the energy that creates the space to be filled. So when we have a culture that does not acknowledge that the creation of the opportunity and the energies and the muses and all the elementals and all that is that it takes to be sculpted into a creation, that all of that is marginalized, we become very, very damaged. That is not integrated masculine energy. And we're all in a discovery as we discover what it is to be open to the feminine energy, and it's scary. For men and males and females alike, it's scary because we don't have an exposure to it. It is not logical. So this kind of spontaneous love is threatening to us. And we shut it down by dominating. And the partner to that is an integrated masculine energy. That's the spirit energy. The soul energy, the spirit energy. That spirit energy is not competing. It's not competing with other men. It's not competing with women. It's not dominating. It's not controlling. It is pure creativity. And the feminine energy is pure potential. If you don't have potential, you cannot be creative.
So how do you go by when you are in the process of creating a documentary, or how do you follow your creativity and intuition?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a simple answer for that. Once upon a time, I did it by dominating and controlling and needing to be right and being afraid of challenge. And now it's a dance.
It's a dance.
I'm in a dance. Sometimes I lead and sometimes I follow, and I am beginning to bring on uncommon senses. We all talk about the common senses: sight, sound, hearing, taste, touch. There are uncommon senses, and they're coming online. There's the ability to see what you're saying, and to hear the movement in stillness. These paradoxical things that have heretofore been the realm of the poets. We're all poets. So how do I become more in tune with my creativity? When I remember that every experience we have is a metaphor. It's an illusion. At the level of the physical world, it's an illusion. And why I say it's an illusion, there are many, many dimensions to that statement. But at the topmost level of that statement, it's an illusion because it doesn't become real to us until we assign it meaning. If I walk across the street and I see a four-leaf clover in the street, it's a four-leaf clover, and it doesn't have any meaning unless I choose to say, this is a weed, I'm going to kill it, I'm going to pull it out of my garden. This is an auspicious symbol of luck, and I'm going to allow it to be a mirror of the part of me that is open for miracles. So, and there's a whole menu, an infinite menu of possibilities between and around those two poles. But the important thing here is that the symbol, the clover, is a metaphor for whatever we choose to hook it up to. Mm-hmm. Our free will as consciousness, as creators, is first in choosing what it is we're going to hook it up to. That's what makes us all poets. Now, when we get
magicians.
And magicians, quite so. Because if we want to really get magical about it, as we begin to step back and step back and step back, and we can definitely, some of the work that I do with myself and with others is of this nature. We begin to step back. At some point we realize it's not that you find a clover. It isn't that you find a clover, that's the cause, and then the effect is my choice of whether it's going to be a mirror my miracle inviting nature, or my weed controlling nature. The deeper reality is the emotion comes first. Emotion being the magical alchemy that happens between thought and between feeling. They don't exist in isolation. They're always connected. You pull on one, you'll get the other one. What happens together, what's greater than the sum of the parts of thought and feeling, is something called emotion that has its own quality. We have the emotion first. And then out of the emotion, that energy precipitates in time-space as symbols, as our poetry in motion. That's what poetry in motion really is. And out of holding that frequency, that energy, we dream the physicality of finding the clover to mirror the physical mirror of what we're putting out. So it is very poetic and very magical.
So do you believe we are gods ourselves that have forgotten that we are gods and goddesses?
I believe that we are all aspects of God, and I believe that that part of the journey of being physical is an exploration of God consciousness. We are not the totality of God. We are not even the totality of yet. We are not. It exists in potentia, but our consciousness has not expanded even to own the totality of what it means to love ourselves fully, or to allow ourselves to be loved enough to have good relationships, to have prosperity, to live in peace, to get the car, to lose the weight, to get the job, whatever it is that is our heart's desire. We don't have even the experience yet of owning that part of our godhood. But we are in process of learning how to release the judgment around that is as part of the steps of getting there. So yes, we are God stuff, and the God journey is of being physical is, let's pretend that we are not connected to all that is. What would that be like as an experience? So the whole of the physical journey, amongst many other things, is about learning to have fun, which I know enrages some people. It's got to be worth more than that. And the other piece is learning to consciously generate success and meaning, to reconnect with the oneness, with the dominion, with the flow of all, with the being at one, the unity consciousness with God, to know your God connection consciously. My doggy knows he is at one with nature and at one with God, but it's unconscious. It's instinctive. It's intuitive. He's not able to reflect on it. He's not able to make decisions out of it. He's able to make instinctive decisions. But we come into physicality. We experience ourselves as mineral consciousness, as plant consciousness, mineral consciousness. One, no directionality. Plant consciousness, directionality from this axis to this axis, whether it's up or it's this way. Animal consciousness, now free to move. Human consciousness, for the first time, self-reflective. There's a dimension inside. Now we start going on the fast track. Then we go into human potential, and then we go into the awareness of the various levels of consciousness, the subconscious, the unconscious, the super, all these levels of consciousness. And now we're at a place where we are beginning to move consciously into our subconscious. We're having discussions about what is our intention about these things. Or when you work with my buddy Freeman, and he's talking about what is the quality of that which you seek? What is the quality of the being of your heart's desire? Not the form. What is the quality of it? Not too long ago, people went to therapists took them forever, if ever, to get to the place where they could even grok that below their desires at an animal level, I want that bone. There were experiences of quality in their lives that they were filled with longing for. And those exist at the level of subconscious. But we are now consciously in our subconscious. That's another reason why the world seems so wacky. It's becoming more dreamy. We're in the astral. 20 years ago, you could only get to this place by dreaming it. Now we're walking through the dream, lucid. So I lost myself here. Where were we?
This is wonderful. No, this is wonderful. And I had something that I wanted to ask you regarding the role of the sexual energy within all of that for you.
The sexual energy is holy energy. And I hope people don't misunderstand me about this. The sexual energy is the union of the sexual act. When it's not loaded with control, when it's not loaded with domination, the actual moment of release, the moment of orgasm, the mental chatter stops. That mental chatter is the voice of the ego voice. It's the voice of the controller. It's the voice of the disintegrated, not the integrated, the disintegrated masculine, not male, masculine energy. And it exists in both genders. We both have to balance this. It's not a men's problem. When we have moments of orgasm, that internal chatter, if it doesn't arrest completely, it is reduced down to 2%, 3% of the chatter that is self-reflective. Competing, planning, out of the moment, in the past, in the future. What am I going to do tomorrow? How am I performing? How is she performing? Do I still have it? Does she still have it? All of this stuff all disappears. It all collapses into an integrated male energy, which is I am present and I am in union. That's the one pole. The other pole is the feminine energy, which is the allowance energy and the energy that creates the space for the unknown. It is inconceivable, note the word. We're talking about conception here. It is inconceivable that we could have such a state unless the feminine principle was at work first, because that's what creates the essence of it, the possibility for it. And then it is the spirit that actually fills it. And together they create ecstasy, which is our birthright. And so there are many, many, many things that make sexuality magical. There are many, many, many ways to become more conscious about it and to understand what an opportunity is for deep, deep knowing and deep, deep insight into what is our birthright, which is that kind of ecstasy in every creative act. And every act we do moment to moment is an act of pure creativity. It is a God-driven act. So back to your earlier question, yes, we are God stuff. There is nothing in all that is not God stuff. We're all God stuff, and we're learning more and more about the dimensions of ourselves that are out of touch with that are walled and lost behind walls of self-protective shame and armor and retreat and withdrawal and adaptive behaviors. So we're learning to love those aspects, and we're learning to open and to discover to the aspects of ourselves that are outside of ourselves. We're discovering who we really are to each other and our relationship to all that is. We're learning to claim it. That's my best definition of spirituality, and it's my best definition of the journey of discovery of our God stuff. And when it's in balance, the lessons we learn from sexuality, clean sexuality, that moment of release, when you have no choice but to, unless you're really, really committed to hanging on to your dominator, you have no choice but to release it. Then we get it's like a reset gift. It's a reset that allows us to experience for a second, so it keeps it alive in our lives, what it is to be in the balance of pure creativity and creation. That's who we are, and that is the level of energy that we can bring to every moment and every interaction when we're aware that it is a balanced male and female, feminine and masculine creation.
Because it is interesting to notice the connection between success and the sexual activity level.
Say more.
Well, it's often said that successful men are very actively sexual men, also, and same thing for men. There's women. There seems to be this correlation between that pure, I mean, I'm talking of that sexual energy, that spiritual energy, and the level of success.
I think that you're right. I think that you're right. And I also, I would add that I think while it's true, it happens as a symptom
Yeah.
of a willingness to be in balance. Maybe not right across the whole, every aspect of one's life, but in certain aspects of life. So I think it's a symptom. I don't think that if somebody says, I'm going to ramp up my sexual activity as a way to stimulate more success, that is a controlling, manipulative choice. So it is already a disintegrated masculine energy I'm going to create by manipulating, and the universe is not going to notice. The universe. I am the universe. I'm just disconnected to it. So the rest of me is not going to notice that I am trying to manipulate. So that that will not be the result of success. It may look often like that there is a connection, but that's not the connection. But to your point, people that are happy and that are fulfilled, that feel good about themselves and are accepting of themselves, that are not that don't have a lot of inner critics about their body, their performance or the conditions of their body, and that haven't allowed themselves to buy into the conditioning that we have to be these airbrushed men and women, and I need a six-pack, and don't think I don't go there. But when I do go there, I am also aware that, okay, there's a part of me who's about 20 years old that still lives, who and cannot conceive of being loved without having a good body. And there are ways and there are techniques and practices to begin to develop a relationship with that aspect, and I practice them, and I help others with getting in touch with those, so that we can develop a relationship, in my case, with that guy, with that little guy. So I don't shut him down, and I very much want to become more and more in tune, so I hear his voice and hear that energy really early on.
Yeah.
And then I can hear it, I can acknowledge it, I can allow him, I cannot make him wrong, and he doesn't have to drive my car in life or in the bedroom. When that happens, and for many people that happens either automatically in certain pockets of life, or those are not places where they get triggered. And for many people, they already feel good about themselves in certain areas, and it gets expressed in success, and it also gets expressed in taking pleasure in sexuality, as opposed to having obligatory sexuality, dominating sexuality.
Yeah. No, that's not what we're talking
ego-driven
about.
sexuality. Yeah.
So I just have a final question about what you're working on, or some of your future projects, and what's happening in your life, in your professional plans, or.
Wow, I have a whole list.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm in the middle of. I'm almost at the end of actually finishing a script that I'm doing that I'll be directing later in the year about the Gnostics, about the early Christian church, the Gnostic church, and I'm working on a book, and I'm also working on a book with Freeman, and we're doing the radio show together. I do lectures and trainings. I do some coaching for people that are willing to work at a particular level of conscious reality creation. That third kind of the story that we're talking about, exploring the great work. And a couple of movies happening. I'm making Richard Bach's Illusions. Have you ever read that? With a wonderful director named Zack Snyder. That's a wonderful book. I think you'd like that. Richard Bach's Illusions. I think
Okay.
you'd really like it. So please read it and then call me back and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
That's a fun spiritual book.
Sounds good. And you're based in California, right?
Based in LA.
Well, I'll stop.
And anybody would like to kind of continue this conversation in some way, we could do it here, and they could also reach me on www.barnetbain.com.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to connecting with you and learning from you like this. Thank you.
It was really fun. So can we do it again?
Yes.
Okay. I did experiment with the substance abuse. And what happened in that experience was that it opened up my unconscious and my subconscious in ways that I was unprepared for. I'm going to my daughter off again.
Daughter keeps on calling you.
I was very unprepared for this, and what came up was all of the thoughts and all of the feelings and all of the unacknowledged opinions that I held about myself, judgments and disappointments and feelings of being bad and shame, and all of this erupted in me like a BP well in the Gulf. It just poured out. And that was my experience of the second kind of stories, the second kind of secrets. And those are the ones that we keep from ourselves. And I didn't realize it then, but when I look back now, I see that those two events were like the headwaters of what has become my life's work, which is to discover our stories, mostly the stories that are around the secrets that we keep from others and that we most important, that we're successful in life. And this is what we're all taught. And when I was 12 years old, one day I was alone in the house and I was going through my parents' drawers and I found a paper that said I was adopted. And I was shocked. I was shocked that I never knew this. So I see my daughter's calling on the Skype line, so let me...
that makes it real.
Real time. She's in Mexico. I'll talk about that later. But so I found this, and I was so shocked that there was this big secret. And this was my first experience of the power of a secret, the power of a story that is kept as a secret. And I didn't understand. It had a tremendous impact on me because I didn't understand how terrible that must be. What terrible, terrible thing that must be if it was kept a secret from me. So years later, many years later, was the summer of love. And there was lots of free love and lots of substance abuse. And I wasn't getting any free love. And so I keep from ourselves. When we can shine the light on these things, we become free to release them. And then we have the power to let go of all of the kinds of stories that have played out of our lives through those secrets and to choose new ones. So I didn't understand it then, but those were the road to an exploration of consciousness for me. And to a lesser extent, they began to formulate my fascination with storytelling, which is expressed in my work as a storyteller. But again, to put things into perspective, that is a lot of fun, but the big game for me in life is to explore my stories as somebody that is on a conscious path.
So which are the stories that most profoundly touch you, storytelling?
Well, I've learned that there are three kinds of stories. And the first story, this is the story of what happened to me. What happened to me? I was hurt.
Hello, Barnet.
Hello, Lilou. Bonjour.
Bonjour. It's great to connect. Thank you for accepting this interview.
It's such a pleasure. It's so nice, especially since I don't have to leave my house.
How perfect. So you're an award-winning Hollywood producer and director, and you worked on some famous scripts, including The Celestine Prophecy with James Redfield.
Yep.
And many other ones. I'm really interested to know a bit more about your story and your background and how this is related to your spiritual path.
That's a great question, and it's great because I've been giving it a lot of thought recently, so I happen to have an answer because I've just been thinking about it.
Yes.
I grew up in a very, very small village in northern Quebec, a village of 3,000 people. And I thought that if I was a very, very good boy and I did everything that I was told, that I would, and I followed instructions, and I did well in school, and I was always honest, and I was shamed, I was abused, I was abandoned, I was beaten, I was disapproved of, I was left out. All of the stories of this is what happened to me. The second kind of story is the story of how I overcame what happened to me. I persevered, I committed myself, I worked on myself, I learned to love myself, I got the job, I got the health, I lost the weight, I made the money, I got the promotion, and I found the love and I've triumphed. This is the second kind of story. And these stories are beautiful. The third kind of story, and that's the story that is my life's passion now. What happens when we have worked through the little story, worked through the triumph story? Next comes a story of where do I now begin to give to the world in order to discover the story of my real connection with myself and